appreciate your participation and hope that we can have an engaging session. So the first half is definitely going to be more introduction, and then I'm going to flip it over to my colleague Jamie, where it's going to be a little bit more interactive in terms of talking about boundaries, communicating consent in a virtual environment, pulling in bits and pieces of our content. So we're going to be going brief intro of One Love. Would love to hear in the chat. We love an active chat, so feel free to share whether or not you have worked with One Love, or is this your first time joining us. So feel free to type that in the chat, but also we want to make sure that we're going over these virtual best practices related to our content, specifically around communicating boundaries and consent, and then feedback and Q&A. No worries, Kelly, you leave for your grad class. I'm in grad school, I totally get it. Do what you need to do. We'll make sure that you have all the materials afterwards as well. So the goal is to really equip you with strategies on how to engage around this content. So everything I'm going to be sharing with you today is going to be available for you all, but keeping in mind that I'm going to show you bits and pieces at the end of how you can access our content completely free, accessible online. So I want you to take 30 seconds to journal. You could write this down, you can think, close your eyes, reflect in your own head. What do you hope your students will know about healthy relationships by the time they graduate? So I'm going to give you all 30 seconds to think about that. And we can come back to it and share a little bit later if you would like, but just take a moment. All right, so just keep that in the back of your mind as we're moving through today. I'm thinking about the goals in which we want to share with our students. So who is One Love? This might be a bit overview for some of you, but for those of you who are new, feel free to type in the chat if this is your first time engaging with One Love content. Love to get connected and talk on a deeper level. But we provide students with the tools, the skills, the education about how to recognize healthy and unhealthy behaviors. We are a relationship violence prevention organization. We focus on providing kids with the skills of how to talk about these behaviors, both in school and outside of school. So we believe that 100% of us are going to be in relationships, and 100% of us can learn how to love better if we just start the conversation. Because we're focusing on these skills, the self-awareness, social awareness, things that we deal with every single day. These social emotional learning competencies are woven into all of the work that we do. And it's important to keep that in mind as we are talking about this today, because we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs that you're required to do and to teach within the school setting. So SEL as well as health standards, we are covered in that department. So when I mention 100% of us are in unhealthy relationships, it's because 1 in 2 trans and non-binary individuals, 1 in 3 women, and 1 in 3 men will be in an abusive relationship at some point in their lifetime, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual. So with that being said, while we might not be included in this statistic, we absolutely will be a friend, family member, loved one to somebody who is experiencing this. So when we're sharing this with our young people, it's how can you be a friend? How can you be a sibling? How can you grow up and be an example in your community and a leader for somebody who might be experiencing an unhealthy relationship? It's really important for me, a white woman, doing this work, to also elevate communities that are disproportionately affected by domestic violence and relationship violence. More than 40% of Black women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. And most recently, statistics show in 2017 that Black women were killed at rates that were 2.5 times higher than white women. So when we're sharing these stories, we're elevating stories, talking to communities who have lost their family members and speaking to those friends. It's really important for us to be elevating those within the work that we are doing, because through that storytelling, it makes it very real. So what we support youth to do, we support young people. So as educators, we hope by the time somebody leaves our workshop, they can understand and engage around the 10 signs of a healthy and unhealthy relationship. So it might be being familiar with the definitions or understanding how to relate them to a certain scenario. But we also hope that they can practice healthy behaviors. So how can they actually show the skill of how to intervene and help a friend, how to support somebody in getting resources. How can they practice healthy boundaries and respecting somebody else's boundaries? Communicating boundaries and practicing consent is another one. Not just sexual consent, but how about boundaries for time, space, and energy? As well as help a friend navigate breakups and accessing resources. Because we are solely prevention and education, it's really critical that we are providing resources and providing individuals with safety plans and exit strategies should they find themselves to be in an unhealthy or an abusive relationship. So a quick overview of some of our content. We have videos that range from middle school, all that are appropriate for middle school, all the way up to adults. It's from 15 seconds to 40 minutes. And it really depends on what your need is in the classroom. Also, what's already approved and implemented in your curriculum within your county. So I would love to see some participation in the chat of, have you ever used, quick question of, have you ever used One Love videos in your classroom? It can be a quick yes or no. Yes. Oh, yay. Love that. Not yet. Ooh, but I love the not yet. So you will. Yes. Yes. Love the couplets. Yes. Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Feel free to keep the answers rolling in. But I want to highlight one video, Amor del Bueno, which came out this fall. It is still what I would consider new. It's a 15-minute film that follows a Latinx couple and how they navigate their relationship. It brings in conversations like generational abuse and how a young person can navigate their life, given experiencing secondhand domestic violence, something that I am personally passionate about in getting this resource to young people. What's extra cool about it is that it was developed by one of our student ambassadors. So a young man said, you know what, I need a film that looks like me, talks like me, has experiences like me, because I know I'm not the only one who is experiencing this. So created Amor del Bueno. One Love is absolutely blown away with the content, and now it's part of our curriculum options, which is really exciting. And it's 15 minutes, so it's completely appropriate for using within a class session. So these 10 signs that I keep talking about, so they're the 10 most common signs of healthy and unhealthy. There are more than that, and this is the main driver of our work. You will see this in all of our content as really this core theme to how you can practice being in a healthy or an unhealthy relationship. I guess nobody would really want to practice being in an unhealthy relationship, but just being aware of what would be in an unhealthy relationship. So I want to hear from you. What signs stand out to you? Feel free to share in the chat. And now at this moment, I'd love to invite you, if you're comfortable, to share also what was your hope for your students, by the time they graduate related to healthy relationships. So do one sign, and if you want to share, what's your hope for your students? It's a small group, so feel free to unmute yourself as well. Possessiveness. Thank you, Kimberly. Guilting. Manipulation. Yeah, all familiar is that we definitely are familiar with as One Love staff, for sure, that we see with young people. Belittling. Hope they'll be able, Corey mentioned, I hope they will be able to identify what healthy relationships looks like, sounds like, and feels like. Yes, that feeling, that gut feeling inside really speaks to me. For students to recognize that fault is not with them and that they can be manipulated with love. Yes, absolutely. Love isn't always a healthy thing. Sometimes it can be used, as a weapon against you. So thank you. Keep letting the answers roll in, but I'm going to move on for the sake of time. So would love to give you all a little preview for those of you who haven't hosted One Love workshops yet. So this is our Love is Learned campaign. This recently came out just I guess about a month ago at this point, and it's new for February. If you've been involved with One Love for a long time, you know that we talk a lot about unhealthy relationships, but it's about time that we pivot and start talking about the healthy ones and what it means to actually learn to be in a healthy relationship. So this is a catalyst for more conversations in the future. So just a quick PSA that I'd love to share with you all.
As kids, we're told that love is a feeling. It's all around us, movies and songs. But what we see in here isn't always right. Once we look a little more closely, we realize there's so much more to learn. One love for healthy relationships.
All right, so again, really great intro that you can share with your students, that you can involve, just to start practicing as healthy relationships. If anybody's familiar with some of our older campaigns like Love Better, that's a really great way to say, okay, how can we pledge to love better? How can we pledge to be in healthy relationships? What can we pledge that we want to learn when we're working with our students? So this is a really great intro or closer at any point during your workshop with your students. Whoops. The next one is couplets, is isolation. So a few of you mentioned that you, I'm so sorry. I've been talking all day and I feel like I have marbles in my mouth, full transparency. So sorry, everybody. Couplets is our middle school content. A few of you mentioned you have used our couplet videos. So this is one example of our isolation that's 15 seconds long.
Want to hang out later? Me and my boyfriend always have Monday Fun Day. Aw. Want to hang out later? Me and my boyfriend always have Monday Fun Day. Tomorrow? It's our Tuesday Snooze Day. Wednesday? No Friends Day.
Again, super quick, super easy to understand. There are 8 of them. These are also really great intro openers to jumpstart a conversation about a particular behavior that you might be talking about.
Hang out later?
Well,
Want to hang?
there you go. The next one, and the last one I'm going to share with you all, is a little bit more serious, Because I Love You. It's just over a minute long, and it brings in the conversation around emotional abuse, particularly control, manipulation. We have 2 short videos. I'm just going to be sharing one with you today that has a theme around social media, digital media, control, and the other one is related to alcohol and drinking, and looking at how drinking is related to excuses versus reasons. So I encourage you all to explore the other one afterwards, but going to share this with you today. Because it is a little bit more serious content, I want to let you all know that if you've had a super long day and you just can't hear language that might be a little bit stronger or might have a more serious tone related to emotional abuse, feel free to mute your computer and you can watch it afterwards. That, not to overuse the word self-care, but self-care is number one, and I'm not going to blame you for muting your computer. So I'm going to go ahead and play this and then move on.
Because I love you. I want to be your only guy.
Because I love you, skip class with me. Let's stay in bed today.
Because I love you, I just want to be with you so freaking much. Because I love you.
I waited for you after Chem Lab.
You were walking with Mark?
Because I love you.
You shouldn't be hanging out with that dude.
You should know how dumb that makes me look. I don't care if she's your lab partner.
Why do you have texts from him?
Because I love you. This number, delete.
Because I love you. This Jason number,
Delete.
And Ben,
Delete.
because I love you, I should smash your phone.
I'll let you give me your password instead. Because I love you.
I will check your texts every day.
You got lucky. Because I love you. Because I love you.
You think it's okay.
Because I love you. You understand.
Because I love you, you stop talking to your classmates. And you feel completely alone.
Because I love you. That's not love.
So I really like that video. Really like that video because it just is, I think the language is so accessible and so real in terms of what we are all experiencing. Looking at excuses and reasons like, I share your location services with me. It's because I love you. I just want to make sure you get home safe. Or, hey, just share your password with me. Just want to make sure that we're on the same page, or we're, having an equal relationship, when actually that's something that's private, right? We don't necessarily always want to be sharing our passwords and information, and that's a form of control. And when you start controlling somebody, that control and isolation, possessiveness are the biggest factors of an unhealthy relationship, which this film dives into. So again, it's a great opener and intro into our content to share with your young people. So I also want to highlight our LGBTQ plus workshop. Shout out Jamie, who created this with Free State Justice, an organization in Baltimore City that does LGBTQ plus advocacy. And it's a phenomenal workshop. We're going to be getting a tidbit of it later. But topics that I wanted to highlight, because within the community, there are definitely topics that they are disproportionately affected, like microaggressions and stereotypes, what it means to break up safely with a partner who might not be out yet with their family or friends, as well as looking at the healthy and unhealthy behaviors through that LGBTQ lens. It's going to look different, and we want to make sure that when we're having conversations about relationships with our students, all of our students are identifying with these behaviors in a way and in a language that affiliates with them and that is associated with them.
And we'll do a deep dive into that in our next SHAPE webinar. So if you're interested, definitely come to that if you can.
Yeah, definitely plug. We're going to be doing the full workshop with Free State Justice. So for sure come. So how to make lessons fun and engaging. It's typically would be film, workshop, discussion, but we've had to get creative since living in a virtual world. So techniques that we use to engage students online is through warm-up questions. We're going to be doing gut checks, which are scenarios and how you can respond to them. Case studies using Jamboards, which I feel like my mom trying to navigate, using Facebook sometimes, but I just learned about Jamboards, which I think is so cool and the best. It's such a cool tool. I used it today. I'm in another professional development, and I'm definitely going to be integrating it more. So I would encourage you all to look it up if you're not familiar. But reactions, using the chat. Some students aren't necessarily comfortable sharing their background. When we're looking at equity between students and access technology and maybe what their home situation is like, we want to think about how can they participate via chat, right? Maybe they don't feel comfortable having their video on. Polls is a great way to engage students. Breakout rooms where people can be in small group discussions just as they would in a classroom. And then role playing as well, allowing students to engage and continue to feel as though they're participating. So best practices that we encourage you all to keep in mind. So keep these in mind, and as we're going to apply them to specifically setting boundaries and consent a little bit later. But we always say step one, which is super simple, but pick your workshop. I literally put it in a stoplight version of, red light, green light, yellow light. This is what we encourage you all to use. The top, we have a deconstructing racism and the 10 signs, LGBTQIA, because I love you, couplets, and our 10 signs. These are all things that we feel as at One Love are the least triggering. Content that's appropriate. Other ones, while we definitely understand, just keep in mind, maybe have additional resources. Check in with your students on a deeper level. You all know your community way better than we do. And so I know schools definitely are using escalation. And so make sure that when you are working with your school, you're just assessing the resources that you're providing for your students virtually, just as you would if you are in person. Consider group size. So I have this in here because it's a step, but I also understand that that's sometimes not a choice with the class size. So you can not disregard it, but understand that. Have a video platform that is accessible for your students. Setting group expectations is a really important one. Having group norms, things that maybe you and the class can agree on. It might be, take space, make space, or be an active listener. Provide a content warning. So when we're talking about these issues around relationship violence, it can be very triggering for some people. So remind people what we're talking about, and they can do what they want to take care of themselves. Just with national resources, handle silence without a sweat. Step number 7, that's my favorite one. I have become the greatest waiting out person for awkward silence. I will sit forever until people talk. And that's fine too. Sometimes with our content, people are just processing the information and they're kind of figuring out how they want to respond. Different learning styles. Some people might be super chatty, others might not. They might want to engage virtually, and that's fine too. And lastly, reach out to us because you've heard Jamie and I, if you talked to us before, hey, always reach out to us. We are always here to support you. And then general facilitator tips for our content is inclusivity. Take appropriate action if someone is triggered. I am working very hard with different counties right now to make sure that we are collaborating with our counseling and student services along with our health education department. So if you haven't already, please reach out to your counselor when you use any One Love content. A lot of them are actually being not voluntold, but I don't want to say that out loud, but we're basically saying we really are encouraging you all to go into the classrooms, support our health educators, and having these really tough conversations so that you don't have to do it alone. And they're wanting to do it. So reach out to them if you haven't already, and I'd love to have a meeting with everybody to have a big yay collaboration conversation. Have confidence, even if you have no idea what you're talking about. Remember, One Love PowerPoints and discussion guides are here to support you. So that's absolutely fine. We can provide you with lots of notes and tips on how to talk about this. And then follow up with resources. Just because we have one lesson or conversation about healthy relationships doesn't mean that relationship violence is going to go away after our workshop. So how can we continue the conversation beyond our one workshop? So I'm going to flip it over to my colleague, Jamie. Jamie, if you want to introduce yourself, share a little bit about you, and dive into the second half of our presentation.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you so very much for being here. I'm Jamie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an engagement coordinator in our Baltimore office, living here in the greatest city in America, Baltimore. Really, really excited to use some of what Grace has taught us so far and apply it to specifically consent and communicating boundaries. So the goal here is really to link consent to healthy boundaries and healthy relationships. I think oftentimes we see consent versus boundaries versus healthy relationships as distinct, but they're all a part of what it means to have a relationship that's based on respect, based on kindness, based on equality. And my dog is just drinking his water there in the background, so excuse his lapping noise there. And boundary setting, much like having a relationship that's healthy, is a skill. We are not innately good at setting boundaries. In fact, we're innately bad at it. So learning it as a skill, practicing it, going through it with your students, helping them feel equipped that when they do come across a situation where they need to set a boundary, they've done it before and they feel confident. We're also going to go through some common questions that we get about consent and some effective responses that I found in my time teaching. So the definition that we love of consent, and I'd love to hear in the chat what your favorite definition is that consent is the presence of a yes, not the absence of a no. So moving away from no means no toward yes means yes. We want to hear a verbal, active, and enthusiastic yes to know for certain that consent is there. I really love the Planned Parenthood FRIES acronym. I'd be interested to know if you all use it. Freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Those are all things that need to be true for consent to be given. I really, really love to use our film content and show scenes where there isn't consent and have students go through this. So say, hey, in the scene, do we think the consent was freely given? And they'll give me reasons why or why not. In the scene, do you think it was reversible? Do you think if this person had changed their mind, that would have been respected? Do you think this person was fully informed of what was going on? Did they seem enthusiastic in the scene? And was there conversation that was specific and precise about what was going to happen? And so a lot of students, when we watch a scene, I'll say, hey, do you think this was consent? There'll be a lot of, I'm not sure, or, yes, I do. And then we go through this, break it down, and by the end, they all say, no, that was not consent. It's a cool kind of analytic tool that I love to use. So I want to tie consent into our healthy and unhealthy signs, because again, I think it's really important that we see consent as a piece of healthy relationships as a whole. So I'd love to hear from you all either aloud or in the chat. Which of these signs, either unhealthy or healthy, do you think relate to consent, and how do they relate? So for example, I think guilting, I'll give an example first. I think guilting can be applied to consent. We're making someone feel guilty, maybe saying I love you and then expecting something in return. That could be a way that consent is not possible because there's that guilting and that pressure going on. Which other signs do you all associate with consent? Healthy or unhealthy?
Respect in terms of on the healthy side, because a person that shows respect, will accept a yes or accept a no.
Yes, thank you so much, Allison. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I see 2 comfortable paces. Yes, absolutely. Comfortable pace can refer to a lot of things, and it can include, consenting to texting a certain amount, consenting to, spending a certain amount of time together versus apart, as well as things that are more physical in nature. And trust, Kimberly says, absolutely. There has to be trust present and trust built And I think it's really important to stress too, we can build trust, we can have a comfortable pace, we can have respect in a relationship that is not a long-term relationship. We can have a hookup with someone who is going to trust, is going to be respectful, is going to set a comfortable pace. So we have to learn those skills, not just in the context of a romantic relationship. Thank you so much, Kelly. Have a good one. All right, we can move on, Grace. So a couple questions that I ask, this is a piece taken out of the LGBTQ workshop. A couple questions that I ask students: how would you define consent? Coming up with a definition is harder than it seems. What words do you associate with consent? We can move on, Grace. How can someone ask for consent? What are some words we should listen for that express consent? And what are some words or physical signals that indicate that someone is not giving consent? And so we can work through these questions and then come up with a definition together as a class of what consent means. So what I want to do now is an example of how we try to keep things fun on Zoom, which is one of my favorites, a spectrum activity. So what we can do is we're going to hear a scenario. If you think it's consent, it's good, it's healthy, do that thumbs up reaction like this. If you're not sure if it's consent, maybe it depends, you need more information, we'll do this one, the little wow reaction. And then if you feel like it's definitely not consent, do that clapping hands reaction. Some people have not updated their Zoom and only have 2. Feel free to write your reaction in the chat if your reactions are not working for you today. All right, so we'll start with the first one. Charlie's 11 years old, and Charlie does not want to hug their grandparents. Charlie's mom tells them that they have to hug their grandparents or they'll get in trouble. Charlie reluctantly does it. Use your reaction to show which you think it is. Consent, not consent, or potentially we need more information.
I would say with the not sure and it depends, just like a lot of One Love content, there's never a explicitly wrong answer. But by this activity, we're hoping to, or what we've seen is that when people either disagree or have differing opinions, it's a really great conversation starter for why is that your boundary? And we are conscious and cognitive of, cultural expectations and differing opinions on how relationships should be. So that's why we have options, and there is no wrong answer. It's just an opportunity for us to engage about it when we do have differing ideas.
Yeah. And in person, I love to have folks kind of line up across the room, showing like a full spectrum, healthy on one side, unhealthy on another side. This is kind of the Zoom version of that. Seeing a lot of not consent, awesome. And so then what I'll ask students to do is share what their reasoning is. Does anyone want to share their reasoning for this not being consent? How do we know?
Charlie was pressured into it, even though he agreed to it. There was definitely pressure.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's that manipulation piece even. There's that coercion, exactly. Even guilting. You're going to be in trouble if you don't do this. That is not consent, absolutely. We'll go to the next slide, Grace. All right, Janice and Carla have been dating for a couple of weeks. Carla tells Janice she's ready to take things to the next level. Janice tells Carla she's nervous because she's never done anything with another girl, but she's definitely interested in trying. Carla reassures Janice that they can take things slowly, they'll check in frequently with one another, and they can always stop if something's uncomfortable. Janice doesn't feel pressured. Instead, she feels reassured and excited to move forward. What do y'all think for this one? See some thumbs up? Yeah, so what are some of the keywords in that scenario that make us know or make us think that there was consent present here?
Because she says we can take things slowly and check in frequently, so there's kind of those benchmarks along the way to make her feel more comfortable.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Absolutely. Yeah, folks are saying check in. There's this verbiage of choice, not feeling pressured, frequent check-ins, and didn't feel pressured. Yes. So what I would say here is so far it seems like there is consent. We don't know if there will be moving forward, So we'd have to know more about how it unfolds. But with what we know now, it seems like everyone's comfortable. We're checking in, we're going at a comfortable pace. All right. Robert is Justin's professor at college. The college does not have a policy about relationships with students. Robert asked Justin to come over to spend the night at his apartment. Justin's nervous. He will jeopardize his grades if he does not go to Robert's place. Just give us that reaction to share whether or not consent could be possible in this scenario. Kimberly says not consent. Ms. Talbert says not consent. Yes, yeah, Ms. Williams, coercion, once again, absolutely. There's that manipulation piece, and even potentially that sabotage piece, which is one of the other 10 signs. It could be that Justin's professor will sabotage his grades, will sabotage his even future potentially if he doesn't agree to this, which is absolutely not consent. We'll move on, Grace. All right. Dev and Yael are in a non-monogamous relationship. They've decided together that they expect each other to practice safer sex with other partners. One weekend, Yael goes on a trip with their partner Jenna, and they decide not to practice safer sex. This is a little more complicated. What do y'all think about that one? I see an unhealthy. I see a not sure. Awesome. I see an unhealthy. Anyone want to share either aloud or in the chat their thoughts on this one? What are some of the considerations here?
I think this kind of goes of not healthy, just because a part of like healthy relationships is setting those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
If your boundary is, practicing safe sex with others, then you're kind of, breaking through that boundary, and then it's also breaking that trust as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Corey. I completely agree. I think it's a question of having set a boundary, having built some trust, and that trust being broken. Yep. Yeah, they decided together. This was something that that was decided as a partnership that one person decided to then break. There's a lot of room for error and unknowing, even if you have set boundaries. Yes, that's so true. I think that's a huge thing to reinforce. Boundaries are going to be broken. We are not perfect. None of us are perfect. None of us are healthy in our relationships all the time. There are going to be issues with boundaries. And so the real question is, how do we handle that? How do we have a healthy conflict? How do we express our disappointment? How do we apologize for our mistakes? How can we grow and learn? I get the question a lot of like, how do we know the difference between unhealthy versus abusive? And I think it really is about patterns, and it's about how people respond when they make a mistake. If someone is open, they want to do better, they listen, they try harder the next time, that's a great sign. If someone is deflecting responsibility, if they get angry, if they're not able to hear, critique or feedback, and they continue to do it over and over again, that's a really good sign that might be an abusive relationship. So it's really about not never breaking boundaries, but thinking through how we respond when boundaries are broken. We can move on, Grace. Yeah, partnership language is a really good point. Partnership language is something to look for in conversation. Yeah, what does it mean to be someone's partner? And that can be in a friendship scenario too. What does it mean to work together as a team and have each other's back and get over things together? Confront something, and instead of being against each other, being against the problem and moving forward. So for me, and particularly being someone who specializes in LGBTQ+ relationship health, it's really, really important when we're teaching consent to talk about the fact that consent is for everyone to ask and give. I think that there is a lot of messaging in our society that says, everyone's going to be heterosexual, first of all, and that men are going to be asking for consent and women are going to be giving their consent. And this does a few things wrong. It's reinforcing that men should be in some sort of dominant role, women should be in some sort of submissive role. And it also doesn't allow men the opportunity to give their consent, and their consent matters as well. It also doesn't allow, young women the opportunity to initiate things and ask for consent and express what they want. And so if we can really, show everyone, people of all genders, should be asking for and should be giving consent. There should not be one partner who's the asker, one person who's the giver. We should all be doing it. And it's something that if we practice it, can become a normal part of our life. So what do young people want to know about consent? I've done a lot of work in all boys schools. I would say the majority of the hard questions I get about consent come from all boys schools. So wanted to share some of the questions. Awesome. We have a comment in the chat. My students are always mind blown when we talk about consent and we discuss types of relationships, i.e. marriages. Yes, and we're going to talk about that actually as one of these questions. Big misunderstanding when it deals with consent. Yep, I could not agree more. So the first question, what if both people are drunk? Get this question all the time. Have you all gotten this question? I would love to hear in the chat if you have. So the way that I like to answer this question, and you can go to the next slide, Grace.
I saw a couple of head nods, so I think that's
Yep.
yes.
We get this question all the time. And please, I would love to hear in the chat what you all, oh, never mind, go back. Would love to hear in the chat what you all said. So what I usually say is, first of all, the way that I talk about kind of how do we know if someone's too drunk to consent, is thinking about, would you let your friend drive their car? If you would take away your friend's keys, if they seem too drunk to drive, you take away their keys, you should also be intervening and keeping them from getting into situations where they might not be able to consent. So if you see your friend getting sequestered off into a corner, taken to another room, we should intervene in that situation just as much as we would intervene if that person was trying to drive. And we know, obviously there's no exact science, but we know, if someone's slurring their words, maybe stumbling, or even if we're just not sure how much they've had to drink, we should intervene. So kind of following that car metaphor, if both people are drunk, I like to ask the question of, we have a car, two people are in the car, they're both drunk, they get into an accident, who is responsible? Whose fault is it that they got into an accident? We have two people in the car, one in the passenger seat, one in the driver's seat. They're both drunk. They get into an accident. Whose fault is it? Anyone have thoughts? The driver. Yes, exactly. Obviously, there is more nuance to it than this. This is very simplified. But yeah, the person who is kind of pushing this sexual activity forward, who's initiating, who's in the driver's seat, so to speak, maybe the person who shouldn't have done that. We don't want to blame the person who's not the one initiating it. Obviously, again, very oversimplified, but I think students resonate with that answer a lot. And it kind of keeps away some of that victim blaming discussion.
We just have to chime in something that, like, way back when in presentations, I used to say, One Love models a lot of their work off, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which actually one of the board members is involved who started MAD. And we say what we're doing is we're changing the norms in how we talk about relationships. We're literally taking away the keys. And so not just with boundaries and consent, but also just abusive relationships in general, is how are we talking about it? How are we normalizing it? When I think of my generation, I never would have thought about getting in a car after drinking or driving. But my mom's generation, very different. So, and that same education wasn't there. So while it's not going to shift overnight, hopefully over generations and starting the conversation, and with you all being here today, that's how we can do it. So just wanted to make that little link.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. All right, question number 2. Isn't consent such a gray area? No. I like to say to students, I actually think consent is pretty black and white. You're either 100% sure that this person is interested in doing whatever you're doing, or you're 99% sure and below, and that's a no. If there's even a hesitation, if there's even a 1%, that 1% of you that's not sure that this person is interested, just wait. Don't do it. Do it another time. Unless we have that verbal yes, unless we have that conversation, then it, it's not consent. It doesn't make sense. So I think trying to simplify it as like, find out, be sure. And if you're not sure, wait. And the way to be sure is to ask. So then it raises the question that I like to raise to students of, why might people hesitate to ask? If it's as easy as asking someone if they're interested and willing, why would people not ask? Do you all have thoughts on that? Could be fear of rejection. Could be awkward.
I hear all the time that people don't want to, like, quote unquote, ruin the mood.
Yep. Yeah. Carol says, my students said they didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. It could be embarrassing. Yeah, you have to vocalize something that is not something we're taught to talk about in our society, which is sex.
Yeah.
Mary says, don't know how to ask.
Mhm.
Don't want to be thought of as active or acquiring bodies. Yeah, good one.
Mhm.
Cecilia, go ahead.
I find that the kids really do need a lot of direct lines for this.
Yes.
They've mentioned to me many times that it really does help to see the lines. They said, well, what can I say in a moment? In lines of like, are you okay with this? Are you comfortable? Do you want to slow down? Those lines for them don't just like flow off the tongue. So they kind of need those prompts I've found with many of my high school kids.
Yeah.
And so much. That's spot on.
When I've worked with kids in terms of asking them, like, how else can you ask? Cecilia, exactly what you just said. And while I never make it a joking topic, I do say, you don't have to ask, do you want to have sex? And like, a lot of the kids will chuckle. I'll be like, you don't have to be so formal about it. Like, there are so many other ways that you can ask. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I've seen a lot of success with that.
Yeah. And it goes back to this being a skill, this being practiced. It's not something that we're just good at. We can go to the next slide, Grace. And so just underscoring for folks, the worst that can happen if we ask is that someone says no. And if someone says no, it is not a representation of our value as a person, of our desirability, of our, goodness. There is no implications for us and who we are because someone says no to us. And that's hard to know. Like, rejection is a hard thing to handle. But just reminding students, truly the worst thing that can happen is it's a little weird and awkward and we'll laugh about it in a week. The stakes are not as high as they feel. We can move on, Grace. Perfect. So here's the question that you all brought up earlier. I've been with my partner for a long time. Why would I ever ask for their consent to kiss them or other things? People have said, oh, it would be absolutely silly to go up to my partner and say, hey, can I kiss you every single time? How monotonous would that be? And it's hard. I definitely see where folks are coming from with this. And of course, there's room for nuance. But I do think we can actually build into our life, into our habits, asking for consent. You can actually build into your life talking with your partner in casual ways about consent throughout the day. It seems absurd because we don't see it in movies, and we also don't really see other people doing it necessarily, but it can be done. Do we have to ask someone if we can kiss them every single time? Not necessarily, but it's really about kind of building up this habit and this practice of asking and having that be a back and forth dialogue if you are in this marriage or this longer term relationship. That's a goal. I think that's an ideal. And yeah, just like Cecilia said, give examples of ways to ask for consent, especially in the context of a marriage or of a long-term relationship. Like, give examples of ways that could be done in a casual, breezy way.
I had a teacher share. She goes, what always works is, are you in the mood? And I was like, there's always how couples develop, like, maybe it's a secret word or maybe it's something. So, telling kids that, if it seems like this big daunting thing, is no, part of being with a partner is that you can have your own jokes and you can have your own isms and inside things. So
I love that, Grace. All right. Big one, question 4. What if I am falsely accused? There have been a lot of parents who have put some pretty profound fear in their children's hearts about getting falsely accused. I remember my brother was about to go off to college and my mother said to him, you better, not get drunk and hook up with women because you could be falsely accused and that could ruin your life. And I remember thinking, wait a second, like, that could ruin their life. Like, why are we not talking about what he could do instead of what would happen to him? I'm gonna see what you put in the chat. Yeah, starting with simplistic scenarios. Do you want to go? And increase intensity of scenarios until we reach the sexual consent piece. Yeah, I absolutely love the idea of teaching consent outside of just the sexual context. especially thinking through COVID, like we have to ask each other consent to take our masks off, to get close to each other. Consent is baked into our daily life in a new way with COVID. But
Never
for what's
thought of
helpful,
it.
oh, go ahead.
Say never thought of that. I'm going to use that example every
Oh,
time
yeah.
I do a workshop now.
And same with boundaries. We have a lot of different boundaries now. But in terms of being falsely accused, I think just sharing stats, false reporting rate is extremely low. Whereas, people who do report, it is very, 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 very unlikely that their report will be taken seriously. It's not to say that false accusations never happen, but this is not a widespread thing. It is such a taxing and terrible thing to have to go through a process like this. People do not do this for fun. A lot of people don't report, and people who do report do it because it's real. So just kind of, if you can, casting away some of the misinformation around that.
Mhm.
And then this question I get from students: what should someone do to protect themselves from being assaulted? And often, I know you all have the same experiences. You have a kid who very clearly has gone through something and is asking a hypothetical question that's not so hypothetical. So it's important in that situation to do what we can to kind of make that student know that it's not their fault. Saying it is not, the onus is not on you to protect yourself from this happening. The onus is on the person who is causing harm to not cause the harm. At the same time, it is a very natural question. Like, people do want to know, what can I do to protect myself? And you can share some thoughts around that, but I try to share thoughts around that in ways that still underscore it is not on somebody to protect themselves. It is not on somebody to get them out of a dangerous situation. There are things we can do around safety planning, having folks on your phone that you could call, checking in with people. Like, there are things that we can do for ourselves, but we should not have to do those things. And those things are not what cause or prevent a sexual assault ultimately. So I want to talk a little bit about healthy boundaries and connect that with consent. So building healthy relationships, we have to have boundaries. I've been doing some research with One Love with some young folks in high school, asking them about how they set boundaries, what boundaries look like among their friends. So I asked these 4 teenage girls, what does boundary setting look like for you all? And they said, there's none, no boundaries. We don't do boundaries. Like, there's no boundaries. And that might not be the experience of all high schoolers. But it was definitely striking to hear, like, people in high school don't necessarily feel they can set boundaries. They know what they are. They know they're important, but they don't necessarily feel that they're for them. And so reminding folks that boundaries are for all of the spheres of our life. They're for our bodies, for our emotions, our work, our time, our energy, our space, our communication, our technology, importantly. And boundaries are not just for our partners. They're also for our family. Our parents in particular can be very hard to set boundaries with. Our friends and acquaintances, our teachers, our employers, our coworkers, and even strangers, like with the COVID example. I've really struggled. I'm sure other people can relate to spending time with my family when we do not feel the same way about coronavirus. What does it mean to set a boundary and say, hey, this is what I need from you to feel safe and feel healthy, with people who are not used to getting boundaries from you? And so anything that we can do in our classrooms to practice that, so that kids feel like they have a little bit more confidence, is going to really set them up for success. We can move on. So some ways that I like to do boundary setting practice: role plays are really fun. Giving students an example, like, we have 2 people, one of them loves to text, one of them hates texting. What would a conversation look like? Either a healthy conversation or an unhealthy conversation when the person who doesn't like texting approaches the person who does. What would they say? How would they say it? How might that person respond? Kids get really into it and have a lot of fun, and then can kind of analyze what they saw in front of them and how it could have been healthier. So again, I think the COVID example is really, really relevant. Thinking through, in what ways are we actually practicing this all the time, but we're not thinking about it as boundary setting necessarily. We're not thinking about it as consent necessarily. And using other examples too, using our snap maps, how much time we spend on TikTok, using examples that are relevant, but that really kind of illustrate what a boundary is. We often practice refusal skills if awkward Sentence stems are provided to assist. Yes, I love that. Yeah, what does it mean to say no? How do we say it? And then also, if that person doesn't respond well, what do we do? How do we respond to that in a way that is protecting ourselves? We can move on, Grace. All right, so those are some boundary and consent tips and tricks. I hope they were helpful. I would love to hear your questions and your insights. I know you all know just as much about this, but hope it was good to hear it from the One Love perspective, and hope that you're able to really integrate this into your virtual classroom. I've had a lot of fun and a lot of success with it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jamie, for chiming in. So before we run up last few minutes for Q&A, and we're happy to stay after as well, I do want to pitch, we do have a robust educator network. We have a cohort of over 60 educators from high school teachers, middle school, public private schools, DV organizations, and colleges and universities. We do have meetings once a month. I did not update this clearly since our last session, but we do have our next meeting first Wednesday in March, and every month has a different topic and theme. So feel free to share your email, or I'll put my email at the end, and just send me a note if you would like to join. Super low lift. It's come listen in, see what new One Love stuff see what new stuff One Love has to offer. And it's also an opportunity for you to connect with each other. We always leave like 10, 15 minutes for educators to be able to chat about challenges they're facing and seeking support from one another, which we have seen so much success in. So encourage you all to get involved with that. And then upcoming session, yay, February 23rd. Thank you so much, Brian, for providing this platform. But our last session is teaching healthy LGBTQ+ relationships. If you love Jamie, you'll be able to see her again the last session. So very happy she's been able to support us through here. And Brian just put in the registration link. Last plug is Education Center. So in terms of accessing all of our content materials, everything you saw today is completely free. Jamie, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link in the chat. But the goal of this is to provide you all with a platform, this one-stop shop for accessing everything related to One Love materials. Plug and play workshops. Don't worry about creating curriculum or content or lesson planning because we already have done it for you. So feel free to make an account. I'm happy to take you through more details or set up time to talk with you later about that. So it covers courses, our dashboard, which is everything One Love related. And then my favorite part is the resource library. So you can search according to film, and we have over 140 resources that we have curated for you that correlate with every single workshop. And we did do our other training session or Shape webinar session, the first one, and I think we have a recording of it, Brian, right? So if you want to go back and review that, definitely feel free. So it's just right here on our homepage. You can see a quick screen grab when you go to joinonelove.com or .org. That's what it's right on our homepage, or Jamie sent you a direct link as well. So just how do you plan to use it? How do you plan to use our content? I can just kind of go through the last bit here. All right, so that's all from me. I'm definitely going to put my email in the chat, but would love to open it up for questions. I know we only have a couple of minutes. Sorry, we ran over Q&A time, but happy to support you all. And thank you for coming.
Just want to give another plug. The Education Center is awesome. It has so much stuff in there. So many different resources and activities and games and webinars and literally anything you can imagine. So definitely use it to your advantage.
Great, thank you all. So definitely send me a note, or if you just want to share your email in here as well, I'm happy to send you all a note with this presentation if you need it immediately, but also to invite you to the Education Center, and happy to support you in bringing this content to your classroom. I would say that's my job, is to support you all in the classroom.
Debbie asked, what do you think about the video consent? It's as simple as T. You know, I have heard so many varying things from students, from educators. Some people literally hate it. Some people think it's the best thing in the world. I actually don't really know how I feel about it, because every time I think I know, someone says something else and I'm like, oh, I changed my mind. I think it's really, really important that we recognize the gravity of talking about consent. I think oftentimes kids might feel, you know, oh, it's not like T, like the stakes are a lot higher. You know, this is a lot more serious. So maybe kind of coupling it with some discussion about, how it is a little bit more complex. It is a little bit more serious. But I think it's a helpful tool. I'd be curious what you all think. I've used it, and I probably will continue to.
I heard another one is like everybody, I actually got this from a health teacher. So is like everybody making a pizza. So if you say, okay, I want, a whole pizza, how can we make a pizza together? Like what's on your half? What's on my half? What do we want to share? Which is also just really creative. And you can literally do it like with actual pizza toppings. But it's a great conversation starter. So let's say you pair students up together and you're like, you have to create a pizza that you both like and enjoy.
You can't do half and half. You have to do one.
Yeah, you have to do one whole pizza. So it's a great conversation starter with something, and everybody loves pizza.
One other thing I've done in person is given kids each a different type of candy. It's a little bit of a more high budget activity, $1 per kid. But give each kid a different type of candy and say you have 5 minutes to trade as much as you want. And they have to run off and, trade and kind of maximize what they want out of their candy. But they have to talk to each other and ask. So then we'll and we won't tell them it's about consent, but then they'll come back and we'll say, how did you do that? What did you ask? What happened when you didn't want to share your candy? What happened when someone said they didn't want to share with you? And have them break it down and then move into the consent lesson from there.
Wow, that's a really good one. You could do it with like mini candies.
Yeah, you can give them like a little handful each. Well, thank you all again for taking the time. I know it is a busy day, and the fact that you all are here is we're so grateful for. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, Brian.
Thanks. It was great, you guys.
Thanks, Alice.